This is Well Read Reviews. Today we're going to be looking at Penguin Episode 1 from the HBO Max series. We'll also be looking at Penguin, Pain and Prejudice, Issue 1 from DC Comics. We're joined by Twitless and Matt C. Stay right there. I'm Well Read, joined by Twitless and Matt C. as always. Fellas, what did you guys think of Penguin from HBO Max? Matt, give us your synopsis.
Yeah, so episode 1 was entitled After Hours, and it picks up right after the events of the Batman movie, and which came out 2.5 years ago. And so we get Oz Cobb, who's played by Colin Farrell, and he's like a mid-level uh, crime. He's working for one particular crime boss, and he's learning how to capitalize on the chaos and power vacuums left by the death of the mob boss at the end of the Batman, Carmine Falcone. So he's playing two particular mob bosses against each other, two particular families, and you're kind of seeing his rise to power, which is really interesting. So
Fascinating. Twitless, tell us about Penguin, Pain and Prejudice.
Penguin, Pain, and Prejudice is kind of a look behind the gnarled, bird, ugly look of the facade that we get from the Penguin, and kind of asking the question, what makes this guy tick? And what led to him kind of being the way he is, and how does that play out as he deals with a life of being just the ugliest son of a gun that ever lived. So clearly the Pain and Prejudice are both things that have been directed at him and things that he now, I think, directs at other people. And so kind of getting inside his mind a bit, and kind of so you're seeing the world through his eyes and also through some of his history.
So what I think is fascinating about these two works is Penguin from HBO Max. A lot of people will refer to as something completely existing in its own world, even though it holds the Penguin's name from DC Comics. But when you actually look at the character's substance and what motivates him, there's so many beats that you can see in the retelling of his origin from Penguin, Pain, and Prejudice. And in many ways, the character in the comics is a lot worse and a lot more malicious and sociopathic than the one that we saw in the show, despite its grittiness and its very harsh take based in reality on this comic book character. Penguin in the HBO Max series shows compassion for a small young thug, identifies with him in many ways, sees a bit of himself when he was coming up in the world and how harsh and cruel it can be. Whereas Penguin, Pain, and Prejudice does not endear any of those sympathies on the people around him and is strictly a cruel, malevolent, selfish, egotistically driven creature of pure evil.
Well, he does love his mother. Now, that's consistent between both.
Yeah.
That is true. You should always love your mother.
You have that Norman Bates kind of psycho thing going on there.
And they do share that in both universes. So I found that to be quite fascinating that they decided to make that a consistent aspect of the character. But the haughty, more aristocratic attribute that is typically present in the comic series was just completely devoid in the HBO Max retelling. He's a lowly thug, just a kid from around the neighborhood. He admired all the local gangsters, wanted to be revered and remembered as they were, but strictly in the setting of his neighbors and his family members. And in the comics, he wanted to be a big shot throughout the city. The Penguin, of course, in the HBO Max series does aspire to those goals, but his heart is still in the old neighborhood and among the criminals that he used to run with when he was coming up.
Mhm. There's an interesting, humanizing element that I think is completely fascinating with what it's kind of a trope that you'll see in comics that takes one particular lane. There's a trope that will go in a very distinctly different lane for television, and that is how you give exposition. So, there's I have yet to find I bet Twitless, you might have a theory for this, but I don't know why the lanes have been established this way, but for comics, it's completely fine for the exposition to be given by the main character as like mental uh, monologue with himself, and that I, it reads well, it works well in the comic format. It allows in exposition through main character monologue is great because it helps you enrich the main character, but they never do that in TV. It would be a complete faux pas to just have this guy, like, listening to, Colin Farrell talk to himself in his head. You always have to add a secondary you have to invent usually a secondary character like Victor, for instance, that he invests in with his exposition, and so you kind of which I always prefer there's every reason you could do this in comics, but they only do it in TV. So it's externalized, and you actually get the investment of uh, the main character Oz into this new character Victor, and you get to you really get double the value in a way because that exposition grows both those characters as Victor learns to become the sort of mob participant that he's been thrust into. It makes it so much richer and more humanizing for exposition to be given through that sort of character development dialogue. We got none of that in this Pinkwood Pain and Prejudice. Unless I'm forgetting, I feel like it was just straight monologue.
Mhm. Absolutely.
That's an interesting observation, especially with these pieces of media, because the Batman itself had a lot of chunks of narration from Bruce. He starts the whole film out by
Okay.
just talking about the criminal element and I am vengeance, and he's just narrating straight over, and they turn on the bat signal because to tell them that to be afraid, and it was like pure like out of an old noir film. It was a dark and stormy night. Uh,
That's true.
so
No,
so it's interesting how they don't do it in television, but they'll do it in film.
that's true. That's
Uh,
true.
but it is interesting but I think you're onto something there because there's film and TV are different registers. What's interesting about the Batman when I saw it was that there was this. It was like the movie was trying to be like a mini series,
Yeah.
and the Penguin was kind of like the type of storytelling that they wanted, and where I think pop culture is leaning. We see this with the MCU, with Star Wars, and the rest of it. Long form content has kind of become the norm, and so, but they
Yep.
want it to have the budget of film, and that kind of leaves you with the miniseries.
And
So
it's gotta be very grounded. There's no Jedi, right? There's not a lot of special effects. It's basically like all the super villains are just people, right? Like Andor or something. It's almost like it reminds me of the Joker. I think the Joker movie, the lore, right? As if I understand this right, I'm pretty sure that that script was well regarded and unsellable until it got rewritten as a Joker story. It was just going to be a sociopath story, and then someone had the bright idea to rebrand it as something that could tie in to the DC universe, uh, and and then it went gangbusters. It's almost like the Penguin. I just going on my instinct here. It almost feels like the Penguin HBO series was an unsellable but high quality script that they rebranded as a DC story again, so that they'd have an excuse to explore something that they felt like they otherwise wouldn't have permission to do. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's devoid of a lot of the penguin tropes, the things that
Yep.
make the penguin exactly who he is. So,
Mhm.
gone is the top hat and the monocle, and any of the bird attributes. And the only reason why he still waddles is because his leg is deformed. So,
Yeah.
He's not a child of privilege. He's a child of the middle class that just grew up in a working class neighborhood and was exposed to a lot of criminal elements. They don't really delve into the story of rejection in the show as much as they did in the comic book, which has always been a fixture
Mm.
of the
Yep.
Penguin's origin, how his father rejected him, and how society at large rejects him. And so, definitely, it did feel like it was cribbing a little bit of Penguin flavor to be able to make it sellable because the character, in a lot of ways, is its own manifestation in the show.
It's funny that you say crib because in the first page of Penguin, Pain and Prejudice, the dad just drops him on it. Just here's the baby, and you just see it on the comic book page, just him just dropping the infant.
Yeah.
The comic is here's the interesting thing. The comic is in some ways, as you said, well read. It is harsher. It's more visceral, and it's worse in terms of its content. A
Mhm.
woman gets behead an old lady to steal a necklace from her. That being said, it is also closer to the aspects of speculative fiction that we see in superheroes, with the top hat, with the bird motif, with the appearance of Batman at the end of that particular issue, that keep you at least somewhat tangentially connected. But what I found with the Penguin show is that it was a complete disconnect for me. The Batman film was already kind of an abstraction or kind of almost a photocopy of Batman, and so you're getting a little bit of a packet loss regarding what the superhero media is kind of meant to
Mm.
be with its
Mm.
take. By the time you reach Penguin, you have like a photocopy of a photocopy. When you've abstracted things to the point where it's just criminals being criminals in a city, where's the superhero? Where's the supervillain? It's just the Sopranos without, quite as much nudity. And but with that being said, they're still trying to like do a little more than just a gang show because they have like the made up drugs. So it's like they're still trying to do little nods, but I just lost all connection to what this piece of media is. And I think that the Penguin's a great when he's stealing the show from Batman. I think there's a reason why this show was made, and partly for it, in my opinion, was that you had uh, the film was so gritty, and so everyone was being so serious because of the brutality of these murders. And then you have Colin Farrell's character who just has this little bit of crazy, chaotic levity. He stands out and kind of steals the show a little bit. And but you run into this issue where your scene stealers are great when they're stealing the show from other people. But if you give them their whole show, we're going to have what 8 hours of Colin Farrell's performance. I don't know if it's enough to carry me through the whole thing, to stick the landing, as it were, to use an
They
bird.
definitely have to create a completely new world where Batman might not even fit in to be able to feature Colin Farrell's Penguin the way that they have. And I don't see where Batman could come into the world. I agree with you in Penguin Pride and Prejudice, where Batman shows up at the end. You have the caricature of the Penguin, and he's sadistic, and you don't have any real humanized aspects to him other than the fact that he loves his mother, which is almost an accessory to how malicious he is and how singularly criminally focused his actions typically are. Penguin in the show is a much more three-dimensional character.
Mm.
He's very cunning, maniacal, manipulative. He knows how to get to his goals, and he knows exactly how to play all the key players against each other. That's a big basis for the plot in the Penguin show. But he's also somebody who cares about the people around him to an extent. He shows mercy to Victor, who he even
Mhm.
argued openly to him. He said, "The logical thing here is for me to just kill you because you've witnessed everything. You know all of the dirty secrets, the things that could bring me down." And he gives the kid a shot because somebody at some point gave him a shot. And that
Yeah.
is not the Penguin that you see in the comic book. So, how Batman would have to intervene to bring him to justice in the show, I don't quite see it. I'd actually rather that it just stayed its own thing and Batman just stayed out of it at this point.
Let's take a brief pause to hear from the awesome creators joining us today and find out what cool projects they're currently working on.
Hey guys, if you love sword and sandal historical fiction with a healthy dose of ancient Roman and Egyptian fantasy mixed in, then check out Kyrie. We've got 450 pages printed so far, a fourth book on the way. Order your books today at curiecomic.com.
Modern day, classic superhero storytelling. Get The Adventures of Omega Girl, issues 1 through 5, now on Indie Planet.
Thank you to our awesome creators, and now back to the video.
Do you feel well read that the Penguin? It sounds like, because okay, I kind of got the impression, the exact same impression that you had, and I got it with this comic as well as the TV show, where this world, it's so gritty, it's so grounded in some sort of dark reality that Batman, I think, is supposed to feel out of joint. Like, you don't like this world, like Gotham doesn't deserve him, and they're getting him anyway. And that kind of disjointed feature of there actually being like a dark angel that's guarding the city that didn't ask for and didn't deserve him is kind of a feature of the lore, I guess, because that was the impression I got from reading this comic from 2011. Like, he didn't, like, why is he even there why does he show up at the end of this? Because this isn't the story you're telling me. You're not telling me a story where a superhero shows up at the end. But then you did, and there has to be a reason. That's me trying to logically walk myself through why Batman has a Gotham. Why didn't we just get Batman without a Gotham? Why did it develop this way, where the villains are just as famous as Batman himself, and the city is as famous as Batman himself, and everything's a lot darker than Spider-Man's, New York City, or Superman's Metropolis. Am I completely missing the point as an outsider, as an ignoramus, with what
Oh, I
Batman's
think
supposed to do?
you're being too harsh. But I will say that part of the reason why Batman needs to show up, this is partly my problem with the show, and this is where I defer. I think I have a difference of opinion from the rest of the panel here, is that I think have you seen the Garfield without Garfield, where it's
Yeah,
and
that's
it's
a good point.
basically, and so there's a certain point where they
Uh-huh.
abstract so far away from what the point of what the strip is that you get a dissociative alienation effect. You can, in fact, make comic strips without Garfield. You remove Garfield from every panel, and like the strips still have some function to them, but it's this very bizarre postmodernist kind of function to it. And simply put, just like fairy tale stories or romance pieces or any other piece of archetypal genre fiction, the reason why Batman has to be there is because it's a superhero story. The reason why Penguin has to act in ways that are beyond what the reason why he has to have the monocle is because he's a super villain.
Mhm.
And if you strip all that away, you get the genre changes. You can't have a James Bond without a James Bond. Eventually, it just becomes a story about government workers just doing their jobs. and then it's no longer, and it's, I'm not saying that those stories aren't worth to tell, but it's not a James Bond piece of fiction anymore. And that's my problem with Penguin. What should be happening with Penguin is this came right off the tail end of The Batman, where Batman was like breaking into the Iceberg Lounge like every other night. They should be talking about, oh my gosh, this freaking bat. And like, and he runs Penguin off the road in that film. Like, Batman is all over them, and he's like all over the crime families. And yet in those the episodes that I've seen so far, talking about specifically episode 1, he's not even, I think he's mentioned in the news. None of the gangsters pretend he even exists.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And like I said, at the end of the day, I was just like, why am I here? And I will say this:
There's no Batman-shaped hole in this. Yeah. Okay.
But it is a trend, though. There is a kind of I said Garfield without Garfield. There is there are pieces of media, Batman without Batman. We had the Gotham series, the television series that ran for several years. And the reward for I think watching that series to the very end was you finally got to see Batman, I think, in the finale of that entire run. And so there's this type of media that's being created for certain superhero characters, but specifically Batman, where Batman is like a teased reward you get by watching the entire run
Right.
of the media.
Right.
And I personally, I'm like, we already had a film where he's all over it. Why do you have to tease him now in a show that is after? It's very perplexing to me.
Well, we are also talking about all of this in the absence of the knowledge of what Matt Reeves actually intends to do with Batman. We've
Mm.
only had the one film so far,
Mhm.
and the character could be evolving into something that none of us have seen before or will expect. So maybe in the future, when he does reintroduce him into this world that he's established with the Penguin, it will make sense in that context. It's just none of the Batmans that we know seem to quite fit into that puzzle, and it'll be something to see once it's actually done.
I remain optimistic that with my ignorant attitude that there's gonna be an interesting way that these villains get deeply humanized and dimensionalized, and yet we still want to see them lose in some way. And
Right.
we're gonna emerge as this particular villain climbs the ladder and does progressively worse stuff and compromises that humanity that have been shown in the first couple episodes. That it's gonna be more satisfying for this avatar of justice to descend and intervene.
Ultimately, Colin Farrell is going to have to devolve into the sadistic caricature that he is in the comics for
Yeah.
Batman to finally be justified in bringing him to Arkham Asylum and locking him up forever. So,
Well, I think Penguin technically goes to Blackgate Prison.
okay, well, sorry.
We
Don't
send
want
the
to.
we send the
Well-
crazies to Arkham. We send
Yeah.
just the
Someone
regular.
else comes from Arkham.
I thought he goes to white collar prison. I mean, come on. Doesn't he? Doesn't he just cheat the stock market a little?
It depends.
Golf
I guess.
resort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It depends on which version. This version in Pain and Prejudice is going to Blackgate.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, I was a fan of both. I enjoyed the Penguin show. I wasn't crazy about the finale. I thought things are a little bit contrived and forced in there, but overall, the writing was pretty strong. I was a really big fan of this first issue of Pain and Prejudice. I thought it's an interesting way to tell the Penguin's origin in a gritty real world setting without the characterization that we see in the show, where they're trying to make him into a three-dimensional sympathetic character. So it's a nice contrast between what you would get with a comic rendition of a gritty real world version of the Penguin versus what you get in televised media. So really hoping for a lot more from both these series and looking forward to comparing them both.
I felt like I didn't like either of these. I felt like neither of them were the Penguin. The first one is just a mobster, and I need the spats and I need the monocle. I need the umbrella. I need these archetypal markers for what Penguin is. If he's just a mobster with an ugly face, you might as well just do Dick Tracy. And in the comic, he's so over the top in his murderous qualities. I like Penguin when he is a little bit more white collar, when he's running that seedy club and he's stealing things with a vaguely avian theme, and he kind of has the trick umbrellas. Those are great gimmicks that are solid for that character, and it makes him a really interesting supervillain. Because even though supervillains may not have all of the Freudian depth of a serious character drama, the archetypal tweaks they have to them make them very interesting story tools for you to play some interesting themes with. And this guy was just like a murderous, vindictive psychopath who, when one guy accidentally kind of, rubs him the wrong way, he goes and like kills everyone and maims people, like everyone you ever loved. I have ruined all their lives. And it was just like, I mean, I expect that kind of behavior from, some other Batman villains, like Victor Zsasz, perhaps, someone who's just like a complete, utter murderous psychopath. But Penguin's supposed to be a little more aristocratic, well read, I think is the term you used, and that is very. He's supposed to be the aristocratic villain, and he just comes across as a psycho straight out of Alfred Hitchcock here, complete with the weird mother thing going on there. He's like bathing her and painting her toenails. It was it just gives this just both shows give me the heebie-jeebies, and I'm like, this is not what I come to superheroes for. So
Yeah, I kept worrying in the HBO series when he's gonna paint his mom's toes or do something even weirder because of this comic. Yeah, this comic was a little. It's funny. It's almost a time capsule. 2011. Like the impression I got is my sense of comics at that time was that people were just racing each other to see how dark and bizarre they could go, and that the darkness of this particular issue plus the photo tracing, which is not something we didn't talk about the art, and I think there's a reason because it was a little stiff and not particularly exciting in places. Although Pickwood himself was drawn well, I think, because that had to come from the artist's imagination. I mean, it was it was a thing, I guess. Issue number one, and then the HBO series. Again, as someone with an outsider's perspective, I thought uh, it signaled all the right notes for a pilot episode. It did all the right tricks. It had many Chekhov's guns that it satisfied in dialogue at different points. It did all the things that a TV show should do. Of course, it did feel like this has been repackaged as a DC, uh, cinematic universe story where they really just kind of wanted to do Sopranos again. But I'm okay with someone giving me, Sopranos, but for 2024. So that's where I'm leaving it.
Thank you very much for checking out the video. Subscribe, like, and stay tuned for more.